I was 12 years old the first time I understood what it meant to live on the wrong side of the tracks. That's what they called it in Pinewood, Georgia, a small town where the streets were lined with history. Some of it carved into bronze plaques, some of it buried in unmarked graves. Where one side of the railroad tracks had well-manicured lawns, tall oak trees, and white picket fences, and the other side, our side, had cracked pavement, run-down houses, and a silence that carried generations of stories no one wanted to tell. My family had lived in Pinewood for decades. My grandfather had helped build half the houses in town, laying bricks with his bare hands. My mother worked as a nurse, my father in construction. They never complained. They never caused trouble. They taught me to be respectful, to work hard, to keep my head down. But I learned young that no matter how hard we worked, no matter how kind we were, there were some doors we would never be allowed to open. The Pinewood County Fair was the biggest event of the summer. Everyone went. They had Ferris wheels, cotton candy, pie-eating contests, the kind of things you saw in postcards. But for as long as anyone could remember, it was unspoken law that people like us didn't stay past sundown. I didn't understand why until the summer of 1968. That year, I won first place in the science competition at school. It was a big deal. I had spent months working on a model of the solar system, painting every planet by hand, making sure Saturn's rings were perfect. The prize was a free ticket to the fair. For the first time in my life, I thought maybe things were different now. Maybe the rules weren't the same anymore. I was wrong. I walked into the fairgrounds with my best friend Marcus. We were the only black kids there, but I tried not to notice. We played games, ate popcorn, even rode the Ferris wheel. It felt like we belonged. Then the sun started to set. We were about to leave when Marcus stopped in his tracks. I followed his gaze. Across the fairgrounds, near the carousel, stood a group of boys from our school, white boys, and they were staring right at us. Paul Parker was at the center of them. Everyone in Pinewood knew the Parkers. His father owned the biggest hardware store in town, his uncle was the sheriff, and his grandfather had built the courthouse. That family had been running Pinewood since before we were even allowed to walk through the front doors of half the buildings in town. Cole smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. I felt Marcus tense beside me. "We should go," he muttered. But I had spent all day pretending things were normal, pretending I could be just another kid at the fair. So I shook my head. We didn't do anything wrong. Doesn't matter. Marcus was already walking away, but I stayed. And that's when I heard it. "Where you boys think you're going?" I turned. Cole and his friends had crossed the fairground. They were standing right in front of me now. "We were just leaving," I said, keeping my voice even. Cole tilted his head. "Good. Don't think y'all should have been here in the first place." Marcus grabbed my arm, but I pulled away. "We won tickets fair and square." Cole's friends laughed. "Fair?" one of them repeated. "Ain't nothing fair about you being here." I wanted to say something smart. I wanted to stand my ground. But then I saw Cole's hands. They were balled into fists. And I remembered what my father had always said. Some fights you lose the second you throw a punch. So I didn't throw one. But they did. The first hit knocked me to the ground. The second made my vision blur. I heard Marcos shouting, trying to pull them off me, but there were too many. Then a loud whistle pierced the air. A man's voice boomed. "That's enough." The boys backed off. I blinked up, blood dripping down my face. The sheriff was standing over us. For a split second, I thought he had come to help, until I saw his face. He didn't look at Cole or his friends. He looked at me. "You boys shouldn't be causing trouble." I swallowed the taste of blood in my mouth. Marcus was still gripping my arm, his own face bruised. "We didn't start anything," he said. The sheriff adjusted his belt. "Well, son, looks like you finished it." I wanted to scream, but I already knew how this would end, so I kept my mouth shut. I went home with a busted lip and bruised ribs. My mother cried when she saw me. My father just shook his head. I thought that was the worst of it. But the next morning, someone left a note on our doorstep. It was written in red ink. "Stay on your side." The message was clear. I stayed on my side after that. I learned where I wasn't welcome. I learned to walk the long way home, to keep my eyes down, to never stay too long in places I didn't belong. And for a long time I thought that was just the way things were. But then I had a son, and one night when he was 10 years old, he came home crying. Said a boy at school told him he couldn't sit at the same lunch table. Said the boy called him a name I hadn't heard in years. I felt something burn inside me. I thought about Marcus, about that night at the fair, about the red ink on the note. And I knelt down, looked my son in the eye, and asked, "What did you do?" He wiped his nose and said, "I told him he was wrong." I smiled. I hugged him. And I told him the truth. Sometimes you fight, you lose the second you throw a punch. But some fights you win just by standing tall.